Greetings from Alaska. This is Fred Roehl, Curyung Tribal member from Dillingham, Alaska. Here to share an experience with you that was emailed into me by a guy named Jason. He wanted to remain anonymous, but agreed to let me use his name. He might be back up this coming fall and possibly do a one-on-one interview about this situation. He was this encounter happened fall of last year, up south of the Denali highway. He had been on a hunting trip with a college buddy he was up visiting, and after the trip he enjoyed himself so much in Alaska so much he decided, I had my wife fly my two young boys up, 7 and 9, and give them some basics on camping. Yeah, it's a great thing. Well, it took a few days to organize, so it was roughly about a week, he said, after hunting season had ended, so a lot of the masses were gone, the ones that really show up and go at it for all the time they have hunting. So the crowds were down, his kids made it, and they had planned on just a couple nights just to get them familiar with camping and setting up camp and all the hardships of being in remote Alaska. It's different than you think. So his college buddy had this bear fence, and so he was extra, protective of his boys and was worried about all the gut piles out in the woods, and brought that little protective bear fence, which is an electrical fence hooked up to a battery. In essence, it's a small bit of a protective barrier around your campsite, especially with, kids there and whatnot. So their first day there, he borrowed his buddy's side-by-side, a little Polaris RZR or whatever it happened to have been. And he gets his boys back in there, and his college buddy's going to join him in like a day or two just to check on him. Well, their first day was uneventful. They went out ripping around on the Polaris, had a great time. By the time they got back that night, the boys were beat. They're not used to all the fresh air. They were living in the city somewhere down 48. So they get everything set up, and he was carrying the load because they were obviously tired and just beat. Excuse me. And he said it was weird. It kept getting real quiet, and then the birds would chirp again a little while later. And he thought it was odd, but he figured, maybe it was some coyotes or a wolf, running around or whatever. So it gets dark. I had a good campfire going, and the boys ate, and they were already asleep. So he watched the fire a little bit and goes back into camp, or onto his cot. And he laid there and he was contemplating what he was going to show the boys tomorrow, show them how to operate a chainsaw and just various outdoor activities that they weren't going to learn where they were. So as he's laying there contemplating these things, he hears something hit the tent, and he figured, it must be a leaf or a twig falling off the tree. So periodically he was hearing this little tick against the tent. Now, where they were was south of the Denali highway, down off the North Fork of the Gulkana River. A very popular spot. Lots of people go there every year to get their hunting, their caribou, their moose. Well, where he was at was just across. Anyone who's been there knows when you come up to the North Fork of the Gulkana, you got to drop down this bluff, and it's steep. So if you're not familiar with an ATV, you can easily wreck going down this thing. But he had been there before, and they navigated it just fine. And once they got across, they found a perfect little spot to set up camp, which was out in a clearing, but near some trees. Enough room to have a nice perimeter of that bear fence up. So he's trying to figure out, well, I don't feel the wind blowing against the tent. What's knocking this stuff onto the tent? Anyway, it's sporadic. It's not a constant, It just every once in a while he'd hear something tick, against the fabric of the tent. He drifts off to sleep, and he hears a loud snap that wakes him up. He wasn't sure what time that was, but the snap he woke up to, he just kind of looked around. Everything was quiet. His boys were sleeping, and he felt nothing out of place, so he drifted off back to sleep. he said he wasn't sure how much time had passed from the cracking to when something off in the distance started howling. Caught his attention. He said it was very distinct. It was like a howl, scream, like a woman being murdered, but with a bear growl incorporated into it. His words, not mine. I asked him, "Can you elaborate on that? What was it? Just one constant, or was it a constant with 2 octaves? What was going on with that?" And he said it was on 2 different octaves. It was a high pitched along with this bellowing growl going on at the same time. You got kids there that kind of creep you out, but anyway. So he's immediately concerned. He has protection, he's got his kids there. He's in remote Alaska. Of course, he's got his hunting rifle and what have you, and a handgun. And he figured, okay, well, we're in the wild. This is where you can hear these sounds. And he thought nothing of it, because he's really not from Alaska. And he would, had he been, he would have known typically only one thing makes that kind of noise. So, the crack goes on, a howl happens, and he's concerned about the howl, but it's not close enough to really raise alarms. It had been about 20-25 minutes, he said. He was kind of laying there and just starting to drift back to sleep when there was another crack and a closer howl. And so, with how closely the 2 sounds were, he said they were within moments of each other. There was a crack, and then it was like a howl, not too far away, but facing a different direction, making the howling sound. Very concerning. 2 young children in the tent. He's not having it. He figured out, okay, let me grab the spotlight. Let me do a security perimeter check. Make sure everything's copacetic. Well, he didn't want to alarm his boys when he was getting dressed quickly. One of them popped up and said, what's going on? He said, just calm down. I'm going to check the fire and make sure we have it, good for in the morning, and there's still some embers to work with. Kid took it at face value and just, let it be. Little boys are curious, as you know. So he gets outside the tent and he starts beaming around, looking for the origin of this crack and the direction he thought he heard the howling from. Well, he's checking the little bear fence perimeter. And that time of year, it gets fairly dark at night. It's into hunting season. It's going into, I think he said it was early September, something like that. So we're roughly on a 12-12 light cycle up here around that time. Because the land of the midnight sun, once we reach June 21st, it starts tapering off. We lose minutes a day. Anyway, so he does his perimeter check, and of course he's got his firearm. He wants to make sure if there's a bear nearby, he can make noise or defend his family. So, I don't mean to make light of this, but the way he expressed it to me, he was very upset about it. But and that's not funny to me. I've just been in his shoes when it comes to being startled. Well, he hears another crack off in the distance, the same direction he had heard the howling coming from that was nearby. As he's checking that area real closely, he noticed a sound behind him, kind of like a oof, 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 and then this kind of click-clacking chatter, almost like a squirrel, but he said it was far too large to have been a squirrel chattering, but it was like something imitating a squirrel chatter. Then he heard an owl hoot. But what bothered him about the owl hoot was it was simultaneous with the click chatter. I personally have heard that before, and it just creates this creepy feeling all over you. Anyway, so he turns his attention behind him to see what the hell is that, and he sees eyeshine. Eyeshine was approximately 9 feet up, and where he saw it was about 30 yards away, right in the tree line, in between. He was just off the trail, one of the main trails, and it was on the other side of that trail about 15 yards. So it was about 30 yards total between the two. He sees the eyeshine, and immediately the eyeshine ducks down and tries to hide, which is very common most of the time. So he immediately is like, whoa, that's a tall bear. He thought it was a bear standing up and looking back at him. and was just curious about the camp because, again, they had that bear fence perimeter. And so he immediately is very concerned that that's a big bear in his mind. That's a big bear. It's very close. I need to get a game plan here of what to do. I got my boys in the tent, and he didn't know which direction this bear was going to go. Tried to follow it with his little spotlight, and it had disappeared essentially. He didn't know what to do about that. He's unfamiliar. He knows that area just from the short hunting trip he was on with his buddy just a week or so earlier. And it really wasn't his forte. He didn't know the grounds very well. He knew what direction he had to go to get out of there, but he didn't know the area. So he's trying to contemplate, okay, I know the river is that direction it went, and it kind of paralleled the trail when the eyeshine left. And he didn't hear a sound, and he thought for sure he would hear like a bulldozer going through the trees, and that wasn't the case. There was no sound. All the sound had stopped once he put eyes on this thing, and he couldn't make it out. All he said is he saw the eye shine and then some kind of hair or fur as it ducked out and went behind some trees and was gone. Hair goes up on the back of my neck. So he's like, okay, I got to get these boys at least dressed and be prepared. He didn't know what to expect. He's not a bear guy. He's not an Alaskan guy. He was just up visiting. So he gets his boys up and dressed and says, yeah, this is what hunters do. We get up extra early. We tend to our fire really well, and we make coffee for everyone. Basically shining them on, but wanting them up and ready in case they had to skedaddle. And he is already plotting on getting out of there anyway. Well, so they're getting dressed in the tent, and he's immediately back outside surveying with the spotlight and the firearm, just wanting to make sure his kids are okay. Well, what he told me was he was spotlighting the fence, and he noticed it was kind of jiggling. And there was no movement, no sound, but this thing was kind of jiggling where he had it set up on these little posts. I was like, that's weird. So he went around to the backside of the tent and looked, and as he spotlighted, he sees the eye shine, and this thing stands up. He said it was very big, bipedal. He made out the face. He said it looked a lot like Patty did on the close-up of the face, but the hair on the top of the head was longer. And he said he immediately knew something was very, very wrong. He felt it deep inside him that this ain't right. I guess obviously if you've never encountered these things and it's there, the startle he had must have been immense. I could just imagine it, because I knew of their existence, and when I saw one up close like that the first time, it scared the shit out of me. But anyway, I digress. So this thing was checking the perimeter of the fence, like jiggling the post and seeing what these wires did. And it stood up. He's beaming it, and he doesn't even realize he has a firearm in his hand. Shooting at this thing wasn't even on his mind. It made a grunt sound, turned around and walked back into the trees, which was a short distance away. But he said it moved silently and rather quickly, but it wasn't moving fast. It was just had a long stride, and it was out of there into the woods. So now he's really concerned. He saw something across the trail, and now something behind the tent. And his boys are in that tent. So he's getting very irrational. He's getting very panic-stricken. And his words were, I didn't know whether to shit or go blind. And which I totally understand. You got a couple youngins, and being a dad, you're on point. So he immediately picks up the pace on getting them ready to get the hell out of there. He starts up the Polaris Ranger. They didn't pack anything. He had his boys get on the gear, get on the rain gear, and all their hoodies and everything. And as he was getting them out of the tent, before he brought them out, he circled around again with that spotlight. He didn't know if they were after his kids. Just curious, because there was no outward signs of aggression at this point. Well, as before he brings him out to put him in the Ranger to cut trail, he was contemplating, how am I gonna navigate this trail in the pitch black? The Ranger has headlights, but there's no bright light to light up the sides of the trail. So he's contemplating these things because he wants to keep his boys safe and everything like that. So as he's going around the tent and spotlighting all around, trying to figure this stuff out just in microseconds, he hears another howl, and it came from the same direction across the trail that he had first seen the eye shine, and it ducked into the trees. So this howl, he said, was it sounded like a woman being murdered, along with mixed in with the xylophone. I asked him can you imitate it at all? And it was just like a whoa, kind of mixed in with a scream, kind of like a quasi Chewbacca kind of. His words, not mine. So he hears that, and immediately it sends a shockwave through his system. Like, what the hell? What is this? What are these? Bigfoot wasn't. It didn't pop into his head until later. In those moments, he was just like, "What the hell are these things?" Oh, get the creeps thinking about it. So he's doing all this, and in the meantime, he's trying to figure out, how am I going to have enough light to see off to the sides of the trail to make sure nothing's trying to get us. He makes a decision to hold out until it gets a little lighter in the sky. You got to understand, going through the trees in Alaska, when it's dark out, it's a different dark. It's pitch black. Can't see your hand in front of your face. None of that. So he was thinking on the side of safety, and since there had been no outward aggression outside of that scream, he wanted to hold tight a little bit and try to wait for the light. He didn't want to get caught slipping on that Polaris Ranger just out in the middle of the Tules with no one other than himself. A 7 and 9-year-old isn't necessarily capable of understanding the dynamics of what was happening in that situation. So from what he told me, he told the boys, stay in the tent. I got to get some things ready before we go. And by now, the youngest boy was sobbing a little bit, really scared from the scream, which I could understand. That's a very jarring thing to hear, those kind of screams. That it is a monster, worst nightmare to run into in the middle of the woods. So he's contemplating these things. What's the best way to go about this? And now, grant you, he's not a very experienced hunter. He's gone hunting down the States, but he only just recently went hunting the week or so before in Alaska. And so he's trying to remember all the little tidbits that his college buddy had told him on that trip about, watch the trail, the river rises quickly if it rains, just typical stuff. And so nothing in that gave him reassurance on what he was going to do. He was very conflicted. He wanted to flee, but yet he wanted his kids to be safe. And I totally understand that. He was getting really emotional because it was a form of torment for the poor guy to sit there, dwell on these things, because it's the livelihood of his kids. It could potentially be life or death, and he didn't want to risk any of that. So he made the hard decision to build up the campfire and just play camp, make some coffee, make some snacks, take that opportunity to gather together some essentials. He didn't pack up the tent or the bear fence. He left that active. Even though this thing was just touching it with no regard of the zap, I don't know. But just peace of mind, I guess. So he gets the snacks and he cooks him something, and he just starts telling them, about his hunting trip from the week before, just to buy time and kind of mentally assess while he was, talking to his boys, his exact move. As they're doing this, he said he heard 3 different distinct grunts from different places. One was further up the trail, the direction that they weren't going to be going to leave. The other one was in the same direction the one behind the tent went, and another one opposite side of the trail where he first saw the eye shine. And so, there's 3 of these things in his mind, and he said he started shaking and crying visibly in front of his boys. And when that happened, it dawned on him that I have to go. We have to get out of here. This is. They're not going away. They don't care about the fire or that fence. I got to get my boys out of here. So he makes that decision, and it's roughly 4:30 in the morning, he said, 4:30 going on 5. So there's a little bit of light on the horizon, not a whole lot. Everything else was still real pitch black silhouetted in the trees. So he said he made the decision. He got them to get their stuff together, showed them how to put dirt on the fire, and basically loaded up. He loaded both boys in that side-by-side right next to him in the center little seatbelt thing that they had. He didn't want them bouncing out. Now, I've tried to use one of these harnesses in these side-by-sides, and oh geez, if you don't have a good aftermarket one, it's digging into you. It's uncomfortable, but it in that situation, it was irrelevant. I could just imagine how uncomfortable 2 of them boys squished in there like that. But anyway, so he gets them in there. He's got the rifle leaned up and kind of leaning on his shoulder, and he's got the handgun sitting on his lap, pointing in a quasi-safe direction. There's a lot of bumps and stuff, but he wanted quick and easy access to either one of these firearms, which I totally understand. They take off, and they're kicking along. He cleaned off the headlights because there was a bunch of mud and debris on them over the years because no one ever really cleans their side-by-side. So he cleaned off those headlights and had a lot more light than he thought he would. So he was a little relieved with that. So they kick along. They're going down the trail, and he's trying to remember the trail exactly so he can navigate it with more speed. Well, as they had to cross the North Fork of the Gulkana, and at that time the water was like 14 to 16 inches deep. Anyone who's crossed there to go up into the alphabets knows that spot I'm talking about, because there's like a little shack city that springs up every fall. Anyway, so he's going up this he gets across, and then now he's going up this steep ass trail, and he has to use a motor force to make it happen, because you can't just gingerly, you got to punch it and boondock on up that thing. So he starts his ascent, and as he's going up, he can hear cracking in the trees on the high side of this trail that goes up the bluff. He can hear loud cracking paralleling him as he's going, and this thing is loud going up the hill. He can still hear that cracking, so his senses are peaked high. Now, one thing he forgot to do was grab the extra fuel for that side-by-side. So they drove in with the full tank, did some running around that first day. He didn't refill it. So he's got like a quarter tank once he gets to the top of the bluff. Which, anyway, let me finish. So with the sounds happening parallel to him, once he got to the top of the hill, he told the boys, duck down, plug your ears, and he shot a couple times out the back of this Polaris Ranger to make noise, just to make noise. He didn't point at anything in particular. He just pointed out and up, boom, 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 made some noise, and continued on down the trail. Now, you got to go past Swede Lakes going back towards the parking area. Well, they heard nothing else after that point, but he was jumbling along so hard, his boys started complaining, ow, ow, slow down, it's digging in or whatever. So he slowed down. But he was looking at the gas situation, so he wanted to get as much distance as quickly as possible before running out of gas. And it just so happened that as they were coming down this little gentle hill that leads up to this gravel pit where everyone parks their stuff in their trailers and what have you, in their campers, he runs out of gas. Just shy, but close enough. There are some other people with campers and stuff, so he felt a little more safe. So he gets his boys out, he grabs that little stuff he had packed with, they jump in his buddy's truck that he borrowed, and they left the side-by-side right on the trail. He got them in the truck and drove out of there. He went back. He went to Paxson, and there was just one lowly street light there at the old Paxson Hotel Lodge or whatever it is. So he said, "Nah, screw this." He went into Glen Allen and parked at the Tesoro there, right there on the corner. Everyone knows it and goes to it. Not until I got light. Then he called his buddy. Came. They went, saved the side by side, and cleaned up the camp. He told him that the boys got sick and he was concerned for their well-being. That's why he got out of there. He didn't even share that experience with his buddy from college. There's a lot of these things that happen to people and they don't express it to even their closest loved ones. Something happens. I haven't even shared all the things I've dealt with my closest loved ones. So I totally understand, because there's a level of, it's easier to speak to a stranger about it because you don't want your loved ones looking at you like you're a kook. That's the last thing anyone wants. Anyway, I digress. Just another encounter to just think about. I'm not saying it happens every day, but when it does happen, it gets real fast. Anyone else who wants to share their encounter or experience here in Alaska, it's alaskanhairymanproject at gmail.com, and that or nocomp907 at gmail.com. Feel free to share, keep anonymous, all that kind of stuff. Just be aware in the woods. You never know what's out there. All right, thanks.